Okay, everybody, welcome to the March meeting of the FileMaker Pro user group meeting here in Dallas, Texas. We're meeting at the Harmonic Treehouse. I'm Taylor Sharp, and Greg Price and I are the co-chapter coordinators, and we're glad to have everybody here. We have an exciting presentation today. Steve Sykora is going to teach us all about, well, we're going to have some development discussions about who's to blame. So I'm sure this will be an interesting discussion. I think we've all been in that situation where we're trying to develop as a team and the fingers start pointing and the problems arise. Anyway, I'm really looking forward to this. I respect Steve, and he's got a lot of background in making teams work. So I'm sure we'll all be learning something. Greg, do you have any announcements for us before we kick off things here?
I think we probably already covered these in past meetings, but we've already covered the fact that this year's Engage has been canceled.
Greg, I guess the only other thing since last month that's really changed is we've announced, or excuse me, Claris has announced that Engage will not happen in Nashville this year. It's going to either be virtual or something else, but we will not have an in-person developers conference this year. So put it on your calendar for 2023. So COVID kills yet another one of our meetings, unfortunately. But maybe that's a good excuse for some of you to pause on air this year. They've got a good one coming up in October. I'll be there. If you're interested in it, be sure to ask some of us about it. I highly recommend it. Anyway, without any announcements from Greg or anyone else, we're going to turn this over to Steve and get going to learn about things and projects here and who's to blame. So, Steve? Well, we're having problems, so.
The camera just crashed.
Okay, well, 1 minute while we readjust our camera that's having difficulties here.
To live on the fly redo everything. All right. Stop. Are you muted? All right, first of all, an audio check. Can you hear me, Ben? And we need some talkback audio to make sure we can hear our remote participants.
All right, Steve, I can hear you in the office.
Awesome.
I can hear you in Colorado.
Excellent. I'm like worldwide. This is cool. All right, well, welcome all. My name is Steve Sykora. I have the pleasure of having a bunch of my team with me in person here, and Taylor is also in person. For those of you dialing in from remote, thanks for joining us. So this is a topic near and dear to my heart because it's the part of the business, the part of the projects that I typically get to deal with, and that is, whose fault is it? So I like to look at two sides of software development, two sides of any project. There's risk and there's opportunity, and they can never be taken apart. They're always two sides of the same coin. And that affects everything we do, every decision we make, how we work together. And I think it's an interesting topic to dive into here. So we're going to kind of low tech this with a bunch of high tech equipment. So bear with us. We're trying to bring a kind of a live whiteboard based event to a remote audience as well as our in-person audience. So we're playing with some interesting stuff here. We're going to start out with just a quick agenda. So if you want to read that really fast, that's what I'm going to talk about. But we're going to start with what I'm not trying to accomplish here. This is not a lecture, a sermon. It's really not a presentation. I do have a handful of slides, but they're mostly notes for me to remember the next thing I wanted to talk about. So I don't have a whole series of prepared remarks to share with you. Instead, hopefully, I have an interesting conversation to guide. I don't think we're going to find any quick answers. I'm going to try and stay away from pithy sayings, though I sometimes trip into those, anyways. Definitely no cited research. I'm not a big, Gartner group says blah, 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 therefore guy. That's kind of not my style if you know me. So I'm not going to be presenting a lot of authoritative cited points for discussion to try and prove that I'm right. This is just mostly my experience and hopefully your experience. I also don't really want to discuss specifically project management strategies or scoping philosophies or tips or tricks, magic bullets, secret sauce, you name it. Not because all of that's not important. It certainly is, and it all has its place, but I want to take maybe a step slightly further back and talk about this subject really in the abstract for a little bit with all the smart people in the room, the virtual room, and the local room. So my goal is, let's put our distractions away and let's all join in the moment and let's talk about this. Let's have a conversation about it. I want to start with the obvious question. What is software development, right? So I said managing risk and opportunity in software development. So I think it's worth discussing what software development is. And I spent literally minutes coming up with the three most obvious bullet points I could come up with for each of these slides. So there's nothing on the slides that's going to help us with this conversation. So they're just there as a reminder to me. So first of all, what's software, right? What is software that we develop? So software is what? Somebody help me out.
Changeable programming.
Changeable programming.
A way to interact with the digital world.
Okay.
Let's say automated tasks.
Automation. Lynette said digital. I'll try to repeat. So for folks in remote, and feel free to jump in as well. We'll try to manage between local and remote.
How we make our money.
I think that's maybe why. But yeah, I think we could abstract that. So software is a career, could be a career.
It's a math machine to consistently execute
Repeatable results.
Yeah, repeatable tasks. So essentially like automation.
Okay. So what are you thinking, Taylor?
I just think of it as a business tool, from a management perspective. It's just one of your business tools.
Yeah,
Think of
business
it as
tool.
instructions for the computer.
Computer instructions. Yeah, so that's kind of like along the digital line. So computer.
It's the manifestation of a workflow.
Yeah.
That was good.
Workflow
Gold star.
manifests.
It also guides the users in how they do their job. So it's not just workflow, it's a specific workflow that we hope will get things done in a better way.
So is or should be? I think that's maybe, because I got to say, there's a lot of software that does not guide the user. But maybe good software should be. So let me ask maybe a further question here, and I'm kind of trying to lead the witness a little bit. Fair statement. What would your mom, assuming your mom is not in software development, so let's make that assumption here. What would your mom say software is?
Frustrating.
Yes. Or maybe that she'd ask, software, what's that? She wouldn't know that that's a part of the computer. Like computer would be what you expect me to say.
Mine would relate to a cookbook.
Cookbook. Yeah, so I think if a non-developer or a non-technical person is asked to answer what software is, if they even understand software, like software, hardware, that it's the squishy stuff that goes in the non-squishy, you know, I don't know, right? Like what's a metaphor? But ultimately, I think it comes across, regardless of their ability to understand it, primarily as magic, right?
There's language I don't understand.
Yeah, which often sounds like magic, right? You listen to someone speaking a language you don't get, and it's just, it's just noise. It's unintelligible.
You can change.
Yeah.
It's the part of the machine that you can change.
It is. It is the part of the machine that you can change.
If you speak the language.
Which gets us to what is development. Right? So what is development? This thing that we do.
Create.
Interpretation.
Organize.
I'm going to write change the machine. What do you mean by organize, Lynette, as far as development?
Well, I feel like part of what you do in good development is you take information, you take goals, you take purposes, you take destinations, and you're putting them in particular orders, and you're building pathways between them to allow someone to do something, which is, if I were to distill all that down, a form of organization. You're just organizing data and goals, not physical objects.
Organizing, I'm going to use your exact words, organizing data and goals versus physical objects. And somebody remote had said workflow manifestation, the manifestation of workflow, right? I think that's literally the same, you know, the same basic instinct there, right?
I would say it's the translation of a set of requirements into an interface.
Okay. Requirements.
I was going to say something similar to that it's the recreation of a business system.
You were cheating off of my notes.
I wanted to wait until you made your comment so I could cheat.
So you could surpass me.
I just want to
Recreation of a business system. I like it. So when we do this development task to make this software stuff, we're trying to understand and build something to facilitate these sorts of things, to make what to the end user effectively looks in the perfect world like magic, and is often frustrating, as Eric stated, right? So I think that's enough for now on what is software development. I think that is the domain of what I want to talk about. So let's erase this and go to the next slide, which I've already put up, which is why do we do this? And I put, again, 3 super logical answers from my perspective. We do it for love, right? Because most of us really, for some reason, we got hooked. We got the bug early on, and we just really wanted to do it. We do it for money. And I think it usually goes in that order. I don't know, maybe some of the kids these days think you can make a lot of money and then they decide to see if they like doing it. But in general, especially in the low-code crowd, in my experience, we decide we love it and then we try to figure out if we can make money doing it, right? So we do it for love, we do it for money. We do it because of some kind of imperative. What do I mean by that? Like we're trying to solve a problem. We We do it because we have to, because we're stuck. There's something to get past. So those are my kind of obvious answers. But why do you do it? Why do it? There we go. I'm just going to shorten that. Why do it?
Kind of get to play God, create living beings.
Living.
All right. Yeah. We get to create / make. Okay. So I think that kind of falls in the love category, right?
I've always liked creating the gears and pulleys. They're like virtual gears and pulleys to make, but for data. So it's kind of like what you're saying, but like I can visualize the gears and pulleys of what's happening with the data.
So generate. So I'm thinking, as you're saying that, I'm thinking of like mechanical watchmaking,
Yeah.
right? Which is exceptionally complicated
Yeah.
and in many ways obtuse.
Yeah.
So we get to kind of create complication.
Yes.
Now, I'm going to ask you to be honest here, Heather. How much of your thrill of that is the ability to do something that someone else can't understand?
I don't know. There's a certain thrill in being able to solve a problem. There's a certain thrill. It's kind of like the first time I made a cake and somebody went, "Wow!" It's why I kept making cakes.
Right. I mean,
people liked it.
Honestly, I think as engineers, my observation is that as engineers, we enjoy creating complexity, and sometimes we enjoy creating complexity to an excessive degree of abstraction, simply because we enjoy it so much, right?
I have almost the opposite take, though. What I like about developing software is the ability to simplify my user's day.
Yeah. Okay. So you do it for user benefit.
Yes.
In other words, you're really driven by the social feedback loop of someone feeling empowered to get something done they couldn't get done before, kind of in that imperative category. What are you thinking, Taylor?
Well, to me, there's just kind of a dopamine hit on solving. Someone has a need and you're solving their problem. And when you recognize that you solved that problem, it's kind of like giving a gift to someone, or helping someone out. Why do it? Except for of course, you should be paid doing it. But there's a feel good part to it.
Yeah, need fulfilled. Absolutely.
To go off he said, like look at it as like a puzzle, the love for puzzles. You have a box of puzzles and you see what it's supposed to be, and then you put pieces together in order to complete the puzzle. But the love for puzzles, you want to get them bigger, like 1,000 pieces, 5,000 pieces. They keep going up, so you want to keep doing more and more. Right.
So I think what you're saying there, Randy's saying, a puzzle maker always wants the next challenge, always wants the next more complicated puzzle. Part of why we do it, I think, is absolutely the next challenge, right? And I personally, that's part of what I've loved for decades at this point about FileMaker, and what I love about low code is it lets us iterate through challenges so quickly that I don't get bored, because I don't have a real long attention span, and I want to move on to the next challenge. And as you get into bigger and more complicated systems, that starts to work against that, right? Because then you have ownership of all this kind of size and complexity.
Steve, I would say that it's not a user benefit, maybe a client benefit, that the reason to do it is to eliminate dependency on human beings. In other words, if an employee leaves, somebody else can come along and continue doing the work without having to have all that training.
Yeah, right. So we had a customer we started with last year, and they had they had a system, and the system was really the person, right? The person's how a thing got done. So we ultimately decided that our task was to replace this person with a system, not because we wanted that person to become unemployed, but because when you are the only way something gets done, that's a prison. You can't go on vacation. You can't be busy doing something else. You can't use your personal, your human creative intellect to some other good effect, because you are the machine. Yep.
That's a huge liability.
I once had an employee, Steve, and I asked her why she was doing a certain thing, and she said, well, that's the way Judy wants it done. And I said, but Judy died 2 years before you came to work here. How do you even know what Judy wants? But it was in the fiber, the fabric of the company, that it gets passed along as a business system, but the software eliminates that.
Yeah. Yeah, it totally should. Yep. So I think that pivots nicely to my next kind of slide here. Why do our users need us? And I could have said, why do our clients need us? But I think if we strip away why we each in this conversation do development, and don't think of it as you in your role, in your profession, whether you're an in-house developer, a hobby developer, someone on my team who's part of a growing team of people. But think of it as you yourself and your user, right? So maybe you're your own user. Maybe your spouse is your user for something that you develop. Just that personal relationship. Why do our users need us, right? As the software developers, why do they need us? Again, I threw the three most obvious answers I could think of to this question up there: knowledge, skill, and time. And the time one maybe isn't super obvious, but let me just two riffs on that. A lot of times when we've worked with really empowered end users, we get to the point in the relationship where they will ask us to do a thing that they very well can do themselves. They know how, or they could figure out how, or they could use some tool to do it. They just literally don't have time, right? And so they do have the money to trade because they don't have the time, right? So I think in a lot of cases, we're simply doing something for someone so that they can do something that's more important, or something that they're more personally relevant or critical to. But let's set aside those obvious answers. Why do our users need us as software developers?
So we give them what they need.
They want someone to blame.
So, no, I think so those are three good points. Let me catch up. So Robert said, because we give them what they need. So they, I'm going to try and reframe that. They need us to, are you going more the angle of they need us to help them understand and facilitate what it is they need to get their job done? Is that kind of the angle you're going for, Robert?
I think the question that I'm not answering is why do they need a developer? The question that I am answering is why do they need us?
Okay.
Because we give them what they need.
Yeah. Maybe kind of the right solution. Robert's answering the us. We give them what they need. Matt, sitting in the second row here, my partner and co-owner of Harmonic for many, many years, had my favorite answer. which is someone to blame.
Oh, no, I was echoing that. That was Dennis.
Oh, Dennis,
Yeah,
nice.
Dennis.
And Matt, someone to blame. Totally, hugely important, right? We are the liability foil. Right? Absolutely. No doubt. Why else? Why else do our users need us?
They don't know what they need. They just know that something doesn't work and they need help.
Think of things.
So they need us to understand and, well, I'm just going to go with your word, and help. Yeah.
So
What were you saying, Jonathan?
I think it goes to the same, think of things they can't think of.
Right. Right. Expand the possibilities. Very, very common, right? When you work with a new user and you start showing them the two things they thought of, maybe in a way they didn't think of it, all of a sudden there's 5 new things that they want that they had no idea they could have wanted.
They know they need something more, but they don't know what they don't know yet. So they're looking to you they're looking to a developer for ideas.
Yeah.
To help them.
Yeah.
So we ask them intelligent questions.
Yeah. What are you thinking, Taylor?
One of the things is that focusing on the word need, and we have ourselves kind of as the category of being software, but the reality is I run into very few FileMaker software developers who are like someone who just does the coding. They're like over in India and they don't know anything about the business problem. They don't provide anything else. The reality is our need usually brings a lot of business experience in and solutions in addition to just software, scripting or user interfaces. We bring a lot of professionalism and understanding how business is done, and it becomes a need of more than just software. It falls over into consulting, general consulting.
I haven't seen that word consultation in quite a while.
Yeah, but I think ideally that is what, in the good sense of a word, a consultant does, is it helps facilitate that business understanding, that ownership of the space. I think extending on what you said, Taylor, sometimes they need kind of understanding and what's the yes, empathy, but
They need a firm hand.
Confidence.
Yeah, you're all going kind of where I'm going. Like they need sometimes a shoulder, right? They need someone to recognize their pain. Sometimes we're literally doing people management, and it's not so much that you're solving a business problem as you're solving a human conflict. In order to even get to be able to solve the business problem.
So, therapist, maybe?
Yeah, therapist, that's the word I was looking for. Thank you, Lynette. I knew we'd get there. Therapist. See, I would have spent 5 minutes trying to find that word to put on a slide and a bullet point. It's much more efficient this way. Yeah. And I think that's totally a huge point, Taylor, that what we do software development, but software development, like the actual code part of software development, is really a small piece of the total package in any one given day. And at Harmonic, we've kind of realigned our teams to recognize that, and we're trying to live into that. So we now have a specific business practices team that kind of starts with what's going on with the business. We have a design and documentation team that takes ownership of that part, separate from a low-code team, separate from a managed services team, right? To try and deal with different aspects of that process. So, having talked about all of this, let's talk about risk. Because I said my topic was going to be managing risk and opportunities in software development. So what is risk? When I think of risk, when I think of the word risk, it's sort of what's the boogeyman around the corner, or what's the anvil that's going to drop on my head? What's the kind of unseen eventuality that could get me? But I think risk manifests itself many, many, many different ways in software development. So just to focus this a little bit, what are the risks of, I think as we've talked it through, what are the risks of custom software development?
Bugs.
Okay.
Missing the mark. Not understanding.
Loss.
Say again?
Loss.
Loss as in like?
Financial or trust.
Cost, loss, trust loss.
Data loss.
Jail.
Data loss.
I think to cost loss, I think it's a customer choosing or wanting to choose not to pay their invoice because they're not satisfied enough with what was delivered, because there's a mismatch of expectations.
Yeah.
And so they go, I thought we were going to get this, and we only got this instead, and you know.
Yeah, so the customer believes that the value and the money are out of alignment at one level or another, right?
Opportunity cost.
And I think on both fronts, right?
Yeah.
Opportunity cost for the user while they try and get something developed, opportunity cost for you. If you choose to work on one thing, you're absolutely choosing not to work on something else.
I was thinking in terms of the customer who thinks I could have done better with an off-the-shelf solution rather than custom.
Miscommunication or communication difficulties.
Okay.
Reputation.
Yeah, so reputation is kind of, like trust loss.
Relationships too.
Saturation of a certain skill set, or they might view it as there's so many people that can do this. How do we know that it's going to be worthwhile for the money, as it will get done the right way? Or for us, we might not get picked to do a certain task and might go to someone else.
Yeah, yeah.
How about litigation?
Litigation, yep. That's certainly one of the more severe risks.
Well, you can go into, all legal liability, including criminal, if you're, you mismanage HIPAA in a criminal way, or, taxes or other things that someone can go to jail for.
I think to that, the security issues, right? When all of a sudden you're building something custom, it's on you to make sure that the system is secure, and so it's again the liability thing. If something gets hacked or there's some kind of security breach, does it come back to you?
Right. Right.
I'm not sure how to put a word to this other than out of control scope creep.
Yes.
Never has communication.
Where the person that gets blamed. What was it earlier? Where the
Scope creep and scapegoat.
Yep. Yep. So I'm sure everyone has had this experience at one level or another. But, and I'm not telling a specific story here, I'm telling an amalgam of 100 different stories. But it is very common for the customer to have an instinct of what they want, and then somehow you manage to get through what I would call the startup FUD, right? You can get the customer over the hump of engaging. So they've decided, okay, we're going to work with you. Okay, I think that's a fair amount of money, and so on and so forth. And then, 60 to 70% way through the project, you're looking at what you think the scope is, and it very much does not match up with what the customer thinks the scope is. And the statement is generally something to the effect of, well, that should have been obvious.
Unspoken expectations.
Yeah.
Steve, when I look at the board, I see a mix of things. Mainly I see consequences from unmanaged risks. That's mainly what we talked about.
Yeah.
When I think about risk, I look at what's preventable. And there's two kinds of risks. There's foreseeable risk, and then there's unforeseeable risk, uncertainty, things that pop up that we can't plan against.
Yep.
It's just going to happen.
Yep.
But then there are other things like scope creep. We can remediate that. We can say, well, this is what we agreed to, and unless you give us a written change order, then we are not going to add this in. And we may say, man, this is more important than everything I told you before. Let's do this instead. And you get the conversation instead or in addition to. But that's the management of risk process. And, you know, uncertainty, who foresaw COVID happening? All you can do is deal with it as it comes.
Yeah, so I think I like at least one thing you said, Bob, which is sorry, uncertainty, spelling difficulties there. Risk is uncertainty, right? I think that's really, end of the day, what it boils down to.
Well, speaking from experience, while you can go ahead and try to codify as much of this as possible contractually with your customers, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to follow along with it once they get to the point where they think they're entitled to more or better or any such thing. I mean,
yeah,
it really has to do with personalities, I think, more than anything else, and being able to manage them, which I think you already have in there. So,
yeah, I completely agree with that. And that's the part of what Bob said that I didn't like, because I've never met a project that fit at least my company wherein it was custom software, which means by definition, we're building something that has not been built before, right? We are making something into existence that no one's made. So the customer doesn't know how to articulate what that is. We don't know how to articulate that is. Therefore, I can't hold them to a change order because there's no reasonable relevant scope that is at such a level of detail on the front end that I can go back to it and say, but we didn't say that I was going to put in 2 sinks. It clearly says here 1 sink. See, building a custom house is trivially easy in comparison. And that's not an easy thing to do. But it's trivially easy in comparison because there's a million examples of custom houses out there. We all know what they are, right? There's off-the-shelf software packages that easily help you scope out exactly what it's going to take. There is no such thing with a custom piece of software by definition. Therefore, it's incredibly difficult to hold a customer's feet to a change order. I think I'd go so far as to say we have never successfully done it.
Well, I disagree. I think we do it all the time by interacting with users so that there's.
Now you're jumping ahead.
Scope creep is when somebody's surprised.
Yep.
And we say something like, oh, sure, I can slip that in.
Right.
It's easy. And
Uncertainty. But now I think you're talking about opportunities, right? We can slip that in, right? So there's the ability to use serendipity to do more magic, right? That's a huge opportunity.
Steve?
And I think every one of these risks has an opportunity, right? The risk of scope creep, but the opportunity of scope creep is the opportunity to do more stuff. Yes.
In my first project that was a decade before FileMaker was born, I was required to live by a thing that was called a functional specification list. That was the blueprint that I suppose change orders could be measured against, but definitely the cost was defined by whatever was in the functional specification list. And I think the problem we deal with today is that FileMaker resists that kind of structure. The moment somebody starts to see what can be done in FileMaker, modifications and things come along, and you could spend weeks trying to create a functional specification list, and the first time you present your initial work to the client, you discover that something was not included in that.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. That's part of that double edge of low code. It's also part of, I think, the era we're in now versus the era that you might be talking about, Dennis, which is we've got the internet, everybody's got a computer in their pocket. There's so many different ways that software is, sorry, there's a weird echo. There's so many different ways that software is seemingly obvious to the end user that what they will ask for is wildly more broad than what they might have asked for 10 years ago or 20 years ago or 30 years ago. Your ability to say, well, that's just not how it can be done, like we used to be able to do with this, is very much more constrained today than I think it used to be.
And I also think one of the things that we're fighting against is the commoditization of software, and people are able to get software for such a negligible amount of money, either for free or for $3 a month or whatever, and they don't realize how many tens or hundreds of dollars or millions of dollars have been spent to build that thing, because that cost is distributed across millions or tens of millions or hundreds of millions or billions of users.
Yeah.
And so they just go, well, yes, I thought it was obvious that you would do this thing because every other piece of software that I use does that thing.
Sure, because Facebook does it or Google does it, right, or whatever, right?
And those are free.
Yeah.
It's like,
yeah.
Well, yeah, but
no.
They're not.
It's like, yes, that free feature actually costs $600,000 to do.
Yeah.
Yes.
All right. But opportunities. What are the opportunities, right? So there's the opportunity to make more magic. I'm going to throw out just an obvious opportunity. There is and we talked about some of these earlier. There's the opportunity to have a career, make money. There's the opportunity to solve problems. What are some other opportunities?
There's the opportunity to solve problems that the customer didn't know existed. Right? Because once you solve one problem, you realize, oh my gosh, there's this other one, and wait, could we do this now?
Yeah, so we can uncover problems through the process as well. Yeah.
Increasing demand for software and software development as the number of devices has exploded. there's an increasing and unending demand for more software to run on those devices.
Yeah.
Especially software that will work cross-platform, across multiple types of devices and even multiple manufacturers.
Yeah, so there's the opportunity for more devices, more modalities, more places that software can work. Yep. What do you think, Andrew?
I think users can save money and time. I think that's huge.
Right. So we're facilitating efficiency, ideally.
Educate the customer.
Become famous too.
Put that under risk.
Make
By doing this, I might be.
Right. Fame. Do we really want it?
You can make your customer a hero. Be an underdog.
Yeah.
That's an opportunity for more opportunities.
Okay. So probably enough of the risk and opportunities. I would state that in my experience, every opportunity has a corresponding risk. Every risk has a corresponding opportunity. Part of the task of doing this, whether it be privately as a hobby or for an employer where you are not billing your time explicitly, you're simply a direct cost, or where you're billing your time explicitly in a time and materials basis. I don't think this is specific to any one of those modalities. Part of the challenge is recognizing both sides of this and dealing with it sensibly. Never waste a crisis. Matt and I both have degrees in music composition. And that's actually where we met in college. One of the most difficult things to do when you're writing a piece of music, and I would say that the same thing is true for a piece of software, is to write a piece of music. Okay, here's the task. Write me a piece of music. Okay, that's literally infinite. It's unsolvable. Oh, write me a piece of music this long using these instruments in this style. Okay, now we're getting somewhere, right? But you got to have fences. And the more kind of fences we have, if our risks are fences, the more opportunities we have, right? Because inside of those defined risks, there's still a lot of playground to succeed. All right, moving on to my favorite talking point, I think. Why does it break? This is the flip side of whose fault is it? And I halfway through this conversation, I'm going to let you in on the secret that I don't think there's an answer to whose fault is it. That's the answer to whose fault is it. But I think this is the really interesting one for me, is why does it break? And I think that we can look at this at least two ways, right? Why does our process of working together to build something break? Why does the thing we built break? Why does the user's experience break, right? There's lots of different angles, but why does it break?
Anticipation failure.
A tool you've been relying on.
Okay, whoa. Slow down. See, everybody likes this one. Okay, hold one at a time. Somebody who.
It was Robert, me, and Heather.
Okay.
Anticipation failure, lack of testing.
Say what you mean by anticipation failure, in other words.
To anticipate properly.
Okay.
And test.
Lack of testing. Now, I think when failure to anticipate can manifest itself a lot of ways, right? Sometimes you, the developer, test it and it works flawlessly and you get it in the field and your user breaks it in 3 seconds, right?
Well, I think that goes
Because
along with my reason, which is lack of information, insufficient information.
Lack of information. And I'm gonna extend on that perspective, right? You are not your user, right? Your user thinks and sees the world very, very differently, especially if your user is mom, where this is just magic and software is something you squish into hardware somehow, right? You are not your user. So what?
I had said a tool you've relied on previously breaks unexpectedly. So like if you're using pre-existing types of software and then there's a patch that goes through and it creates a bug and it destroys your code and you had no control over that thing.
Yeah.
However you want to sum that up.
Right. I'm going to sum that up as environment, which was my second bullet point. And I just want to say something about that for a second. Like what we do is kind of crazy in the sense that the number of layers that we are away from the actual electrons moving is astounding, right? The number of variables, it's actually amazing that it ever works, really, if it comes right down to it. And we're in this world where everything keeps moving faster. Faster and faster software updates, faster and faster security patches to fix things that bad actors are trying to perpetrate, right? My third bullet point, malicious action or malicious intent. And all of those things can cause environmental failures.
Unintended consequences.
I think human error or human fault.
Unanticipated uses.
Ooh, yeah, I like that.
Growing pains.
So I would actually argue that user error, in my philosophy, does not exist. Right. And the reason that I say that is if you claim that it was user error, what that means is you built a thing that allowed a user to do the wrong thing. And it's my job as the developer to build a product that you can't break.
The metaphor I use is a roller coaster. You want the person to get on at a certain point and get off at a certain point, and only those points, no matter where else you take them.
Right. And so if now obviously this is why software is iterative, because the developers are humans as well, and we're imperfect, and we realize, oh right, I forgot about that, but the goal should be that our users simply aren't allowed to do the wrong thing because we've designed it in such a way, we've error trapped in such a way, we've checked conditions to do them the favor of making sure that they can't break it.
However, not all clients have a budget to totally to do that sufficiently, like to prevent them from copying and pasting something into a field that includes characters that do bad things.
But I thought that was obvious. That we would do that, right? That was obvious that we would do that.
To what extent, right?
Well, how are you going to keep someone from putting last name in the first name?
So I would
Exactly.
add to what Eric is saying, in that basically you have to understand how your user thinks. So there's this old, if you've heard me say this before, I make no apology, but Steve Jobs had this this idea that the computer was the bicycle of the mind, and it was because they did this test where they scientists had discovered that cheetahs were the most efficient animal in the animal kingdom, and the only thing that trumped it was a person riding a bicycle, because it helped to elevate their efficiency to such a level that they could surpass even the most, top animal in the kingdom.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think one thing I had to learn to do early on was to learn to think like my user. And I think I've met a lot of developers that will develop something in the way that they say, well, if I had to do this, this is how I would do it, right? But trying to develop something in a way that, okay, let's say I'm working for someone named Tom. How would Tom do this? Or how does he do it? So in that way, I think taking that approach has, it's served me pretty well in the past. So
yeah, so to turn it to why it breaks is if we don't understand our user's process or our user's perspective or our user's value systems, right? I thought they cared about this number at the bottom, and in fact, what they really care about is the green dot.
Right.
The user's expectations.
Say that again. It wasn't quite loud enough.
The user's expectations.
Right. So it breaks.
It's very easy to not know the user's expectations, especially if you're a developer.
I think maybe expanding on that is it quote unquote breaks because, well, that's not a feature the software has.
Right.
Right. So the user tries to do a thing and they go, it's not working. It's not letting me do this. And you go, well, right. It's never been able to do that. That feature hasn't been built in yet.
So I do think it's telling.
And so it's not broken. It's not broken. It's working as intended.
Right.
It just doesn't have a feature that they
Well,
thought that it had.
Eric, that's where we tell them it's user error.
That's the opportunity,
That's the difference
right?
between expected and intended.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
That could also be the difference in who is your actual customer. Is it the one that's signing the check, or is it the one that's sitting at the machine?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Yep. Good question.
My experience is that I'll have a problem and the developer will say, oh, I can solve that. And then they solve that problem, but then they, without knowing, create a bigger problem for me by solving the one problem they solved because they created a new problem.
Yeah. Unintended consequences.
And then I'm just grumpy because it's still taking me just as long or longer, even though this one part is faster.
Yep. Totally. Andrew.
I think just like overcomplicating like the solution and trying to do too much.
Yeah. Complication. So I wrote down, I did actually write notes on this one slide because I said it was my favorite slide. I think in my experience, one of the things that we tend to, actually, I'm going to leave that. Who's a customer? That we tend to overlook, but is often a huge driver of this, in addition to all of the stuff that we've talked about here, right? Not saying any of this is wrong, but scale, complexity, and age, right? If I were drawing a graph, if any one of these three things is present, the risk of failure goes up. As they are present in addition to each other, the risk of failure goes up logarithmically. And scale, what do I mean by scale, right? Number of users, literally simply number of users. Something that you're building for one user has an entirely different chance of success than something you're building for 1,000. Also scale of data, right? Amount of data. Complexity, just complexity, right? How complex is the system? How complex is the process? The more the complexity, the more it's likely to break. And then age, right? As things age, we forget. We add things on top of it. We generate unintended consequences as a result. We abandon code. Sometimes that code stops working because FileMaker in their infinite wisdom changes how that function or call operates. Right? And then we've got, hey, Mr. Customer, really, we didn't do it. The environment did it. Well, nonetheless, your system doesn't work anymore.
Or the business rules change.
Business rules change, yeah.
Wouldn't the opposite of complexity also be true?
Too simple. Totally. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, that probably
Not included, too small, too simple, not a broad enough
I would
solution.
think that only becomes a problem once you introduce one of those big three things. Because if you build something for 100 people and it works perfectly at 100 people, but then it needs to process 10,000 people, that is when it becomes too simple. And that's by virtue of it getting older and needing to go up in scale.
Right. So the risk opportunity, I mean, I think many folks who've worked with FileMaker have succeeded brilliantly initially to have the customer thrive, to have the solution die under the weight of itself because the customer used it so much and was so successful with it that now the solution literally can't calculate anymore, right? It can't calculate in a timely fashion. All right. Just a couple parting thoughts here. Ownership versus responsibility. The term take ownership, own the problem, sometimes you can hear things like that and it sounds right, but I think it rarely is. When we own the failure or own it breaking, it doesn't help really get to the heart of the issue and let us detangle with our customer the knot that we've co-created. Whereas when we're willing to take responsibility for helping to do that, we can be seen as an asset, right? And we can work together to move the ball, to untangle that knot. And I think right along with that goes this statement that I would make, opinion versus empathy. It's very easy when you are super experienced, when you're super knowledgeable, when you really understand the failure at a technical level, to try to use opinion to solve the problem. And what I mean by opinion is, this is what's wrong, let's do this to fix it. And of course we have to understand what's wrong to fix something, but the danger is when we fail to listen to our customer, when we fail to empathize with our user and really get it from their perspective, often our fixes just generate more unintended consequences. Or put another way, when we fail to empathize with the customer, even if our fix is perfect, they may not like it because you just told them what they had to do. So leadership, and whether we're talking about leadership here of a developer-user relationship, leadership on a team, leadership in any of its forms in helping us detangle these knots, I think has to be a process of engaged facilitation. As the software developer, we certainly have kind of infinite power in one sense, right? We have the keys. We can do anything. But if we're simply exerting our opinion and making decisions, our outcome is unlikely to be well received over the long haul. If we're engaging our users, go ahead, Heather. we have food being delivered, and they may or may not be doing the right thing. If we're engaging our users in order to facilitate their success, regardless of whose fault it is, we can have a relationship that lets us move forward, that lets us untangle the knot, and lets us get over the hump and solve the problem at the end of the day. So that's all I've got. We're 70, 80 minutes in. Any thoughts from anybody on this kind of topic? And I've really appreciated all the notes. I've now got my presentation ready to go, and I'll be giving it at a future point. Yeah, Paul.
One of the most important things to do to mitigate risk is to set expectations. The user the customer, the user, the person writing the check has to understand this is an iterative process, like Eric said. This is a process that will involve bugs, and we presume you want your bugs fixed. That's part of the process.
Yeah, so true.
You can't expect perfect software because it's made by human beings. And if that's what you're demanding, you need to go over to that other development company that produces it. Good luck with that.
Steve, while you were talking, I emailed to you something that you can share with your team. I didn't want to interrupt your progress there. It's from the old FileMaker Report newsletter, and maybe some of the people remember it. It was called The Legend of Master Po and Lotus Blossom. And in short, it discusses what the client tells you that they want, and Master Po listens to the whole thing and doesn't write down any notes. And in the end, his conclusion is a record is an insurance policy. And so often what we have to deal with in the construction of a system is to figure out what are the records. And the client seldom knows that that's what FileMaker is dependent on.
I like it. So setting expectations constantly and iteratively. I totally agree. You can't say, okay, we're ready to take this feature live. We've tested it. We know that it's perfect. Nothing will go wrong, right? You're asking to fail at that point. If you say, we've done our best, we've taken the amount of time that we think is possible in your budget and in our timeline to do this and test it, and we think it's time, we know something's going to go wrong, but we're here for you when it does, that's a much more long-term, likable statement to the customer. Yeah, Heather.
Two things. Along the same lines as what Paul was saying, there are two points I wanted to make. One is has a real financial impact on the business, and that is the setting of expectations, because it boils down to what is going to be a loss to the business because you're going to have to write it off as warranty work versus this is part of the process.
Yep.
Right? So it's real important. But the other part is, and I will get the quote wrong, but there's a quote by Maya Angelou. I can't pronounce her name right.
Maya Angelou. Yep.
Maya Angelou. But people won't remember what you say or do, but they will remember how you made them feel.
Yeah.
So having that empathy with your customer is real important. In the end, you're going to do the right thing. You're going to get the customer to do the right thing. But if you can get them to do the right thing and they felt good about it, and they felt good about the way you got them to do it, they're going to remember that they enjoyed the relationship with you.
Yep.
And it'll be subtle, but it'll be important to your relationship. So I think that's really, really important. As important, I think, as the money, long term.
Totally. Lynette, last comment.
All right. It actually somewhat tags along with the concept of relationship. I think as any studio, and that can apply pretty broadly from an arts studio to a software studio to, I mean, like some kind of physical studio, right? Every team develops their own process in how they get things done, how they manage scope, how they manage their risks, how they manage interpersonal conflict, whatever. You develop your process to make the train go. And the more you can invite the client onto your train, so they feel like they're there at every step. They don't need to see you do the legwork and execute all the little bits, but if they're there to at least observe the decisions and understand that yes, all things were considered, I agree with the decision, they don't either retroactively try to change the decision you made so they feel like they were involved and they were influential, which can sometimes lead to worse solutions. But also, if you get to the point where whatever it is you built broke down unforeseeably for all the reasons we talked about, it's far less likely for that client to go and lambast you with blame and try and tear you apart and get you to fix it all, because they'll have been there to see exactly why it happened. And they'll know that we didn't miss anything, we just didn't have information until this point in time. So the likelihood of working with you in the future to solve it and to be flexible just goes up exponentially the longer they spend on that train.
Yep. All right.
I think there's one other thing important, especially for independent developers out there who aren't working with a team, is that sometimes there are bad clients.
No.
Yeah, just sometimes.
That's only an independent developer problem?
Okay, yeah, it's not just an independent developer problem, but sometimes there are bad clients, and sometimes it takes some of us a long time to learn to recognize them sooner, but in time, learn to cut them off sooner and sooner and sooner, so that you lose less and less, and sometimes it is their fault.
All right. Last word from Heather. Sometimes it's the client's fault.
Makes us all.
Just sometimes.
All right. Well, thank you all. I'll mute my mic, Taylor, if you want to sign us off.
Okay, everybody. Thank you. Well, I guess we got an echo for being here. We'll be back next month. Dennis Burnham is going to give us a presentation. We're looking forward to that. And hope you guys have a great month, and we'll see you next month.
Are you sure about that, Taylor? Taylor?